The night my husband walked into our retirement dinner with another woman on his arm, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I reached into my purse and felt the envelope I had placed there 3 weeks earlier, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. But let me back up. Because you need to understand what 38 years looks like before you can understand what one evening can undo. I am Harriet Moss. I turned 63 last April, and I celebrated that birthday alone in my kitchen, with a slice of lemon pound cake and a cup of chamomile tea, because my husband, Walter Moss, was away on a business trip to Charlotte. He told me the meetings ran through the weekend. I believed him. I had been believing Walter for so long that disbelief had simply stopped occurring to me as an option. We met in the fall of 1986, at a church potluck in Greensboro, North Carolina. I was 25 and had just started teaching 3rd grade at Elmwood Elementary. Walter was 28 and working his way up at Piedmont Financial Services. He had wide shoulders and a slow, easy smile, and when he asked me to dance to the music coming from someone's radio in the parking lot, I thought, well, this is the man. We married 18 months later. My mother cried at the wedding. His mother cried harder. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings and carried white gardenias, and when the pastor asked if I would love and cherish and honor this man, I said yes with my whole chest. For a long time, I meant it. And for a long time, I believed he meant it too. The early years were ordinary in the most beautiful way. We rented a small house on Sycamore Street. Walter advanced at the firm. I kept teaching, kept grading papers on Saturday mornings while he mowed the lawn, kept packing his lunch every day, because he said nobody made a turkey sandwich the way I did. We had our son, Douglas, in 1990. Our daughter, Nora, in 1993. I coached Nora's soccer team for 4 seasons. I organized every school fundraiser Douglas ever participated in. I was a room mother and a Sunday school teacher, and the woman who always showed up with the right casserole when someone in the neighborhood had surgery. I was, for 38 years, what Walter needed me to be. And what I needed, well, I learned not to say that too loudly. Walter became regional vice president at Piedmont Financial in 2004. That was when things began to shift in ways too small to name. He started working later. He started wearing new cologne I hadn't bought him. He started looking at his phone and turning it face down on the dinner table. But these are the things you explain away when you have children in high school, and a mortgage, and a life so woven together it feels impossible to pull a single thread without unraveling everything. So I didn't pull threads. I pressed my hands flat against the fabric, and I held it all together. Douglas grew up and married a woman named Felicia Marsh, bright and sharp-tongued in the way I quietly admired. They have 2 boys now, my grandsons, Trevor and Miles. Nora lives in Seattle. She calls me every Sunday morning, and those calls have kept me sane in ways she probably doesn't know. By the time Walter announced his retirement last spring, I had been teaching for 37 years. I retired alongside him, or so we said publicly. Though the truth is, I had already been planning to retire the following year regardless. I wanted to travel. I had a list: New Mexico, Portugal, the Oregon coast. I wanted mornings where nobody needed anything from me before 8 o'clock. Walter's firm threw him a retirement dinner at the Harrington Club downtown. It was a Thursday evening in October. The kind of night where the air has that first real edge of cold, and the sky goes dark just a little too early, and you feel, if you're not careful, a little melancholy about all of it. The Harrington Club had a private dining room with crown molding and heavy curtains, the color of burgundy wine. They had put his name on a little placard by the entrance. Walter Moss. 30 years of excellence. I wore a navy dress I had bought specifically for the occasion. I had my hair done that morning. I took care with my earrings. I wanted to look like the woman who had stood beside this man for 38 years. Because that is what I was, and I wanted people to see it. Our son Douglas and Felicia arrived before us and found seats at the round table closest to the podium. I hugged my grandsons, who had been allowed to attend as a special occasion. I spoke to Walter's colleagues, people I had cooked dinners for, attended holiday parties with, known for decades. Walter's office manager, a woman named Patrice Cole, took both my hands when she greeted me and said, "Harriet, you look absolutely beautiful tonight." I thanked her. I meant it when I said I was proud. Walter said he needed to greet the senior partners near the bar. He touched my arm, told me he'd be right back. He was not right back. I was midway through a conversation with Roger and Linda Whitfield. Roger had been Walter's colleague for 20 years, when I heard the room change. Not a sound exactly. More like a frequency shift. The kind of thing you feel in your sternum before your brain catches up. I turned around. Walter was standing in the entrance of the dining room, and beside him, her hand through his arm, was a woman I had never seen at any company event in 38 years of attending company events. She was younger. Considerably younger. I would put her somewhere around 40, though I confess I was not looking at her very carefully at first. I was looking at my husband's face. At the particular way he was smiling, easy and warm, the same slow smile he had turned on me in a church parking lot in 1986, the way his hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. I had been in the room long enough that most people nearby were already watching me to see how I would react. I did not react. Not outwardly. I excused myself from Roger and Linda with the quietest apology I have ever uttered, and I walked, slowly, on purpose without rushing, to the corner of the room where I had left my handbag on a chair. I sat down. I opened my bag. I put my hand on the envelope inside it. I had found out 7 weeks earlier, not through some dramatic discovery, not through a text message left open on a counter. Through Patrice Cole, actually, who had agonized for 2 months before. She finally called me on a Wednesday afternoon and told me in a halting, sorrowful voice that she had seen them together at a restaurant in Durham, that she had seen them twice more after that, and that Walter had introduced this woman to at least 2 junior staff members as his companion. That she had not wanted to tell me, that she had not known how not to. I thanked Patrice. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after we hung up. Then I called an attorney. Her name was Sandra Okafor. One of the most respected family law attorneys in Guilford County. Recommended to me by my friend Marguerite, who had navigated her own divorce 8 years ago with more dignity than anyone I have ever witnessed. Sandra was direct and clear-eyed, and did not waste a single word. We met 3 times over 6 weeks. She prepared everything. The filing date had already been established. All that remained was the serving of papers. And I had chosen, after much deliberation, to handle that part myself. I had not planned for it to happen at the retirement dinner. I want to be honest about that. My original intention was to do it quietly, privately, the morning after, to let Walter have his evening, and then end the marriage in our kitchen over coffee, with no audience, no scene. I had made that decision partly out of dignity, and partly, if I'm truthful, out of 38 years of habit, the habit of smoothing things over, of protecting his image. But then he walked through that door with her on his arm, in front of his colleagues, in front of my son and my daughter-in-law, in front of my grandsons, and something in me, some last remaining thread of the woman who had pressed her hands flat against the fabric for decades, simply let go. I waited until the dinner had been served. I waited through the salad course and the main course and the first 2 speeches from the senior partners. I sat at the table beside Douglas and Felicia, and I ate my chicken. And I smiled when people looked at me, and I was pleasant to everyone who spoke to me. Because I am 63 years old, and I have earned the ability to be composed in difficult circumstances. Walter had seated the woman. I learned later, her name was Diane, that she worked in the financial sector in Raleigh, that she had been involved with my husband for nearly 4 years. At a different table. Near the window. Close enough that the arrangement required explanation. Several people at my table were very carefully not looking in that direction. When the 3rd speech began, a tribute from Walter's longest-tenured colleague, a man named Arthur Sims, I stood up. I picked up my handbag. I walked across the room. I was aware of people watching, and I moved through their gaze the way you move through cold water. Steadily, without flinching. Walter saw me coming when I was about 10 feet away. I watched the shift happen in his expression. From relaxed, to uncertain, to something approaching fear. I stopped in front of him. I reached into my handbag. I withdrew the envelope. I placed it on the table in front of him, directly beside his plate, with a steadiness in my hand that surprised even me. "You are being served," I said. "Sandra Okafor's office will be in contact with your attorney." The room was very quiet. Arthur Sims had stopped speaking. Walter stared at the envelope. He looked up at me. He said my name, Harriet, in a voice I had not heard from him in years. Low and stripped of everything that usually covered it. I looked at him for a moment, just a moment. 38 years of Sundays and potlucks and turkey sandwiches and mortgage payments and soccer games and Christmas mornings and birthday cakes. I looked at all of it in his face for the last time. "Enjoy your evening, Walter," I said. Then I walked back to the table, picked up my coat and my gloves, kissed Douglas on the cheek, squeezed Felicia's hand, told my grandsons I would see them Saturday, and I left the Harrington Club alone, into that cold October night with the streetlights making gold circles on the wet pavement. I need to tell you about Douglas, because I know you're wondering. My son is a good man in most of the ways that matter. But Douglas is also his father's son in some ways. Not in terms of faithfulness, I don't mean that, but in terms of conflict avoidance. In terms of believing that family problems should be solved quietly, behind closed doors, without damage to anyone's public standing. He called me the next morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee, and I had slept better than I had in months, which struck me as strange and correct all at once. "Mom," he said, "you could have handled that differently." "I know," I said. "Dad is Douglas." I set down my cup. "I know what your father is, and I know what he has been for the last 4 years. Patrice Cole knows. Several of his colleagues know. The only person in that room who handled anything wrong last night was your father, when he chose to bring that woman to his retirement dinner. That was his decision. What I did was mine." There was a long silence. "I just think," he started. "I am not asking for your approval," I said gently. "I am your mother, and I love you, and nothing about this changes that. But I am 63 years old, and I am done making myself small so that other people are comfortable. That's finished now." He didn't respond to that immediately, but before we hung up, he said, "Are you okay, Mom?" And I told him yes. Honestly, yes. Nora called from Seattle 20 minutes after Douglas and I hung up. She had already spoken to Felicia, who had apparently described the entire scene in the kind of vivid, sympathetic detail that made me grateful, once again, for my daughter-in-law. "Mom," Nora said, and her voice cracked on the word, "I am so proud of you I don't even know what to do with it." I had to press my lips together to hold it together when she said that. "I should have told you sooner," I said. "I should have." "Don't," she said. "Don't do that. You did it your way, and you did it right." Nora flew in the following weekend. She stayed for 9 days. We drove out to the mountains and walked a trail I hadn't hiked in 15 years. And we sat on a flat rock at the top of a ridge and ate sandwiches and looked at the valley below, and I thought, this is mine. This view, this air, this daughter beside me this afternoon. This is mine. Sandra Okafor's office handled everything professionally and swiftly. Walter retained his own attorney, of course. There were difficult conversations about the house, about financial accounts, about the ways a 38-year marriage untangles. And I will tell you that untangling is never simple, no matter how clear the circumstances. There were nights that were hard. There were mornings when I woke up and reached for the familiar shape of a life that was no longer there, and had to remind myself that the absence was something I had chosen, that the empty space was not a loss but a door. I won't pretend I didn't grieve. I grieved the marriage I thought I had. I grieved the man I thought Walter was at 28 in a church parking lot. Before 38 years of small betrayals accumulated into one irreversible one. You can mourn what you wished something had been while still being certain that leaving it was right. Both things are true. I held both. What helped me? And I say this for anyone who might be sitting where I sat, at 63 or 50 or 75, wondering if it is too late to start again. What helped me was small, consistent things. Coffee on my porch in the morning with no one else's schedule to consider. Phone calls with Marguerite, who had been through her own fire and come out the other side. Long walks in the evening. A watercolor class I joined at the community center, which I am not good at but which I love deeply anyway. My grandsons, Trevor and Miles, who came for sleepovers on weekends, and taught me card games I had never played, and fell asleep on my couch with their mouths open, trusting and uncomplicated, and Patrice Cole, who called me 2 weeks after the dinner to ask how I was doing, and with whom I have had lunch every other Thursday since. She is funny and fierce, and has become one of my most important people. Sometimes, the people who hand you the hardest truth become the ones you can't imagine living without. There is a postscript to this story, and I share it not for satisfaction but because the truth requires it. Walter's firm was made aware of the situation. I don't know the exact details of how. Small cities have long memories, and Greensboro is a small city. But Walter's relationship with Diane became known among leadership, and given that it had apparently intersected with several workplace interactions that raised questions about professional conduct, there was a quiet investigation. Walter was asked to formally end his consulting agreement with the firm, the advisory position he had been slated to move into post-retirement. He did. There was no announcement. But it happened. I am not glad about Walter's pain. I want to say that clearly, because I think sometimes people assume that women in my position want to see a man destroyed. I don't. I wanted my life back. I wanted my mornings. I wanted to walk through my own days without shrinking. Douglas came to me, about 3 months after the dinner, on a Sunday afternoon with his boys in tow. He sat down at my kitchen table, and he looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I handled that phone call wrong." I told him he didn't need to apologize. He said he did. I let him. We had a long conversation that afternoon. The kind of conversation Douglas and I had never quite had before, where both of us said things we actually meant instead of things that kept the peace. He told me he had always known his father wasn't easy to live with. He told me he admired what I had built for our family, and that he hadn't said it enough. He teared up when he said that, and I reached over and put my hand on his, and Trevor, who is 9 and observant, looked up from the floor where he was playing and said, "Grandma, why does Daddy have wet eyes?" And I said, "Because he's a good man, baby. That's all." I am writing this in March now, 5 months after that October evening at the Harrington Club. My house smells like the soup I made this morning. A navy bean soup with smoked turkey, my grandmother's recipe. The watercolor class has a small exhibition at the library next week, and one of my pieces, a painting of the mountain ridge where Nora and I had our sandwiches, is going to be displayed. Nora is flying in for it. She has already told her colleagues she has an unmovable family commitment. I am going to Portugal in June. Marguerite is coming with me. We have booked 9 days, and we have a list of things we intend to eat and places we intend to walk. And I have bought a travel journal in which I will write every evening in a cafe somewhere I have never been. I am 63 years old. I have taught hundreds of children to read. I raised 2 people who, in their different ways, make me proud. I made the turkey sandwiches and ran the school fundraisers and held the fabric together for 38 years with my own 2 hands. And then, on a Thursday night in October, under the crystal chandelier of the Harrington Club, I finally put those hands to different use. I walked out of that room and into my own life, and I have not looked back, not once.